You are listening to the EPT Works Listen, Love, Give podcast. Hi, I'm Dr. Annette Cargioli, the Forgiveness Doctor. I'm here to help you create phenomenal health, happiness, and new life with energy, intuition, and forgiveness. EPT is short for Emotional Polarity Technique, an innovative, holistic emotional therapy that will change your life for good. You can subscribe to this podcast, get free EPT training at eptworks.com, and like us on Facebook. Welcome to episode 3, Stop Overeating with Emotional Polarity Technique. This episode is all about emotional eating. If you have ever wondered why you keep eating even though you aren't hungry, or you eat more food even though you are stuffed full to the brim, then in this episode, you are going to learn 3 crazy emotional reasons you overeat. I'm also going to give you specific forgiveness statements designed to free you from the beliefs that are driving your compulsive overeating and put you in a healthier relationship with food forever. Finally, I will walk you through statements from an actual EPT session so you can also benefit for your own healing transformation in your relationship with food. So let's get started. 3 crazy reasons you overeat. Number 1, to keep from feeling. You may have experienced this consciously when you have had a bad breakup or something terrible happens in your life and you decide to eat a whole quart of Rocky Road ice cream. When you fill up on food, you can keep from feeling the anxiety or sadness or anger because all you feel is the uncomfortable feeling of too much food in your belly. Once this coping strategy of stuffing yourself so you can't feel anything else except the food in your belly, once it works for you, then you are prone to unconsciously use excess food to avoid any uncomfortable feelings. After all, you can count on your favorite food to make you feel good, especially when relationships or life situations are making you feel bad. Overeating provides a full feeling that serves as a distraction from feelings of anxiety, abandonment, anger, or low self-esteem. Here's some forgiveness statements. Before I do the forgiveness statements, I want to say a few years ago, I was listening in on an Oprah show that had Gary Zukaroff in it. He's the guy who wrote the book, The Seat of the Soul, many years back. And she had him on quite frequently. Well, she was discussing with him how she didn't think it was a big deal that she decided to eat all of her favorite foods, mashed potatoes and homemade bread and, everything that was a comfort food to her when the movie she had done, which was called Beloved, didn't do so good. And so she's kind of going on and chattering with Gary Zukaroff saying, I don't know what the big deal is. It's not like I went out and did drugs or that I drank or, so I ate some of my favorite foods and maybe I ate a lot of my favorite foods. I don't know what the big deal is. And she's kind of looking at Gary and, he was, if you remember him, he was just very, very low key kind of personality. And he just, and he's just looking at her and she says, what would you suggest that I do, Gary, when something disappoints me like that? And he just looked at her and he said, Oprah, I would suggest that you pray, oh God, please let me feel. And in that moment, I could see the wisdom of Gary Zukaroff. He's a genius. That's really true. And I took that to heart. And this is something that I myself have dealt with. So I realized that when I became conscious of my own overeating, that I would say this prayer, oh God, please let me feel. Because that's really what you're avoiding when you're overeating. So here's the forgiveness statements. I forgive myself for believing that I have to use food and being full to take away the bad feelings in my life and my body. I forgive myself for believing that food can take away my hurt and sadness. I forgive myself for believing that food is love. I forgive myself for believing that I don't feel anger, I get fat. I forgive myself for believing that food is the only good feeling I have in my life. And if I didn't have food, there'd be nothing good. I forgive myself for believing that I'd rather feel fat than feel the hurt. I forgive my dad or my mom, or you fill in the name, for hurting me. I forgive that person for not loving me. I forgive that person for teaching me to use food to soothe my pain. I forgive my mom or my grandmother for handing me food when I really needed her loving touch. I give myself permission to let go of this unhealthy pattern with food and to be honest about what I really need. I give myself permission to stop using food to block unpleasant feelings and to ask God to please let me feel. The second crazy reason you overeat is to feel powerful. Now, I know a lot of you out there are going, oh, no, when I overeat, I just feel so powerless. But actually, it's the opposite. You're eating because you feel powerless somewhere else in your life. People who struggle with losing weight or maintaining their ideal weight usually don't think they feel very powerful around food. However, in our rich culture, food is one thing that you have almost unlimited access to. Practically anything you want to eat is within your reach and your price range. So when you feel powerless to pay a bill or to lose weight or get into your jeans or control your child, eating all the food you want, any food you want, whenever you want, can make you feel powerful. Here's how this looks. I can't pay my mortgage, but I can buy and eat an entire bag of barbecue potato chips. I can't make my husband treat me with respect, but I can bake a batch of chocolate chip cookies and eat them all, and no one can stop me. Overeating suspends the reality of your powerlessness in another area of your life. You can't do something over here, but you can do it over here with the food. You know, when I think about this concept, in cultures where they don't have access to food, they can't even do this. This is a problem of a rich culture, which we live in. So here's some statements. I forgive myself for believing when I feel powerless in my life, eating all the food I want can make me feel powerful. I forgive myself for believing food is my greatest source of power when I can't do what I want or get what I want right now. I forgive myself for believing the person who controls the food is the one with the most power. Some of you have had moms who control the food and say, no, you can have this much, but mom can eat all she wants. She's the one who says who gets to have the food and who doesn't. I mean, there are houses like that. I've also had clients who have houses where I had one client who had a house where they actually had a big buffet full of candy, and these kids were allowed to eat candy all the time. And it really became the substitute for mom's love. So it can go either way. I forgive myself for using food as a source for power when I can't do something in my life. I forgive those who have taken ownership of my power. I forgive myself for giving ownership of my power to food. I give myself permission to let go of using food as a source for feeling power over things I can't control. I give myself permission to eat everything I want whenever I want without ever using it again as a source for power. All right. Number 3, the third reason that you overeat: to store up for a future famine. A famine is when there is no food and consequently you starve. Your emotional eating may be a compulsive response to a famine experience in your past. It could be your family really didn't have much food, or that food was unreliable. In other words, you never knew when you were going to eat. Some days you had dinner and some days you didn't. Some days there was lunch, some days there were breakfast, but it was very unreliable. Maybe you didn't know when or if there would be another meal. So you would overeat to store up in case there was nothing to eat later. Some of you have actually done this before you go on a diet. Go on, admit it. I know I have. Oh, I'm going to start the diet, so I've got to stuff myself with everything I love. So I'm filled to the brim with all the junk that I'm not going to eat on the diet. You know you've done it. All right, so I know I've done it. Storing up for a future famine isn't just about a famine of food, although it can be in this country where there's poverty. I mean, I have clients who truly had no food when they were growing up. They didn't know where they were going to get their next meal. One client told me that she had a specialty. She could make mustard sandwiches, and that was white bread with mustard on it, and that was it. And that was their dinner, which just kind of floors me, but that still happens. And when I have found people who have that kind of lack of food in their childhood, they are usually really obese. I mean, they are morbidly obese. They have so tried to make up for that loss of food that it is very common that they're very big. So perhaps you could have experienced famine of love or attention or money. These famines could have still caused your starvation for love or attention or money. So that could be a family that's growing up and they have lots of money, and then they just go through total bankruptcy and they have nothing and they're living with grandma and grandpa. That kind of a famine where a lack just strikes the family, or it's just an ongoing lack that the family lives with and never knows where the next paycheck coming from. So constant, compulsive piling up of excess food in your body is your way of preventing the hurt of previous famine to ever happen again in your life. By metaphorically filling your barn with food, you think you can prevent such starvation and hurt from ever happening again in your life. Now, I'm going to throw in here, sometimes these famines, those of you who have taken this class, those of you who are EPT practitioners, and EPT practitioners all know that this could be a famine that is real in nature in a previous generation. So it is possible that if you are working with a family that has this chronic obesity, that, and we all know these families that everybody is obese. And once the little kids even come up, they become shaped obese like the family. I actually believe that families like that are dealing with a generational famine that could be tracked if you talked to the family and asked enough questions about the generations before. Probably, 2 generations back or more, you're going to find where there was devastation and actual food famine. And so then you see the whole family, just kind of everybody tends to fill their barn, and it's their way of compensating so that if this famine hits again that happened in this family generations before even, they're going to be ready for it. So here are the forgiveness statements. I forgive myself for believing I have to store up with food so I am not caught in a famine again. I forgive myself for believing another famine is coming. I forgive myself for believing I'm going to experience more loss, so I must fill my barn to prevent feeling that loss ever again. I forgive myself for believing I can keep from feeling the loss by pouring my energy into filling my barn with tons of food. I forgive myself for believing I'll never heal from the famine of food, love, attention, money in my past. I forgive myself for believing there isn't enough for me. I forgive myself for believing I have to compulsively overeat just so I won't be afraid of being without during another famine. I forgive myself for compulsively hoarding food in case there is no food, love, attention, or money in my future. I give myself permission to let go of my loss and to accept there is enough for me. I give myself permission to accept there is enough love, enough attention, enough food, enough money for me. All right, now I promised I'm going to do some statements from an actual EPT session. And this was a client who had figured out that love is eating and drinking. And her mother couldn't give her love, so she gave her food and drink. Even as an infant, her mother did not know how to nurture her child. So this client said, when I want to love myself, I have to also eat and drink. She also told me that when she gets excited, she wants more to eat and drink. So she can have an elation feeling and still want more to eat and drink because love became associated with putting things in her mouth. So her emotional statement that I identified muscle testing with EPT and the process was, I feel grief, loss, and vulnerable, and fear at 7 months old because I need love. My mom substitutes food and drink for love and attention. I picked this particular case because I think a lot of people, it really boils down to their relationship with love. And the statements in this session totally cover this. So I'm going to do these statements and you can just kind of like take them in. You can repeat them as I'm saying them. You can just let them absorb into your own psyche. But I think that it's going to change a lot that you might be dealing with food right now. I forgive myself for believing I have to substitute food and drink for love. I forgive myself for believing food and drink are love, and they are what I really need. I forgive myself for believing I can't love myself without also overeating and drinking. I forgive myself for believing when I feel the need to love myself, to celebrate, I have to eat and drink. I forgive myself for depending on excess food and drink as my source for love. I forgive my mom for forcing a dependency on me where I substitute food and drink as love. I forgive myself for believing there is not enough love for me, so I eat and drink excessively. I forgive myself for eating and drinking excessively because of a belief there is not enough love for me. I love and accept myself, even though I am afraid there is not enough love for me, and so I must eat and drink excessively. I forgive myself for believing I need excess food and drink when I am really responding to a false belief that there is not enough love for me. I forgive my mom for starving me of love and substituting food. I forgive myself for believing I have to eat and drink excessively out of fear there will not be enough love for me in the future, and food and drink are love. I forgive myself for believing by eating and drinking and filling up my barn, I can prevent the future loss of love in my life. I forgive myself for believing there is a famine of love that will happen again and again. So I must fill up with excess food and drink. I forgive myself for believing that I can prevent the loss of love, the grief, vulnerability, and fear by overeating and overdrinking. So when the famine comes, I'll be ready. I forgive myself for believing I can't accept the famine of love in my life that occurred through my childhood. I forgive myself for believing I can't heal from the famine of love in my life. I forgive myself for believing I can only cope or respond to this famine by constantly seeking to fill up my barn with food and drink. I forgive myself for believing I want excess food and drink when I really want to avoid the famine of love ever happening again in my life. I forgive myself for believing this can't change. I can't stop coping with past famine and future fear through overeating and drinking. I forgive myself for believing I don't want this to change. I forgive myself for believing if I continue to cope with the fear by constantly filling up my barn with excess food and drink, I will have love. I forgive myself for believing there is no better way to cope with my fear of loss except this way of stuffing myself so I'll be ready when a loss happens. I'll have enough love. I give myself permission to continue to stuff myself as my way of coping with previous loss and future fear of loss. I give myself compassion for having to continue to do this to myself as a way of knowing that there will be enough love. I forgive my mom for giving me a famine of love in my life and substituting food and drink for love. I forgive myself for believing there is no other way I can know there will be enough love for me, and there is enough love for me. I forgive myself for believing if I quit stuffing myself, I won't have enough love. I forgive myself for believing that love is outside of me. I forgive myself for believing I don't have love. I am not love. I forgive myself for believing I am empty of love. There is no love for me. I forgive myself for believing I can't experience love for myself because I don't believe I am love. I forgive myself for believing love is apart from me. I forgive myself for believing I am separate from love. I love and accept myself even though I feel a deep fear of separation from love because of my childhood experiences. I forgive myself for believing that mom separates me from love. I forgive myself for believing that pain separates me from love. I forgive myself for believing that joy separates me from love. I forgive myself for believing that happiness separates me from love, that freedom separates me from love, that money separates me from love. I forgive myself for believing good relationships separate me from love, that success and achievement separates me from love, that good friends separate me from love, that life itself separates me from love, that health separates me from love. I forgive myself for believing I am and will always be separate from love. I forgive myself for using the trauma of an unloving mother or loss of love as the only way I can experience love. I forgive myself for believing food and drink are the only way I can experience love. I forgive myself for settling for excess food and drink when I really am reaching for love out of the illusion that I am separated from love. I forgive myself for buying into the illusion that I am separate from love. I say yes to all the trauma, grief, loss, vulnerability, and fear that has maintained my illusion of separateness, and I call it all up, and I release it from my body, mind, and spirit to divine love and gratitude. Even though I may continue to overeat and drink, I accept it is an illusion that I am separate from love, and this habit is bringing me more love. Even though I may continue to overeat and drink, I accept there is no separation, and I am and always have been and always will be love. I give myself permission to continue to overeat and drink without the need or compulsion to fill up my barn for future famine of love. Without this pattern, I am free to enjoy what I eat and drink without using it to bring myself closer to more love. Without this pattern, I am free to eat or not eat to drink or not drink without feeling the illusion that I am separate from love. Without this pattern, I am free to accept I have always been love. I am love. There is no separation. Without this pattern, I am free to be loved without going into a panic over a past or future famine of love. Without this pattern, I no longer have to feel fear when there is love. There is enough love. I am love. There is no separation from love. Without this pattern, love no longer is the trigger that takes me into a post-trauma famine of love from my past where I had no way of fixing it or managing it except by overeating and drinking. I release this pattern with love and compassion so that I may come to know and experience the truth of who I am and who I will always be is love. I release this pattern with love and compassion so that when I notice my compulsion to overdrink or overeat, I can gently give myself love and compassion and say, that's okay. You don't have to do that. I'm here for you now. There is enough love. You are worthy. There is no separation. The famine is over. I release this pattern with love and compassion so that now when I notice myself overeating or overdrinking, I can be kind and compassionate with myself and allow what is to be loved. This acceptance and love and compassion is all I am. It's all I need. And I have the power to give it to myself, even when I don't like my own behavior. I forgive myself for all the times I have blamed others for this pattern and hence given them my power to choose a different experience. I give others permission to forgive me for blaming them and handing them my power to choose for myself a different experience. I take back the power I gave to others in blaming them and holding them responsible for my beliefs, my reactions, my failures, whatever. I am so sorry I gave that up, and I ask God to restore that power back to me so I can use it to create the experiences I would love to have. Without this pattern, I am free to create new experiences out of the truth of the love that I am. Without this pattern, I am free to create new experiences out of the energy of love that I am, that I have always been, and that I will always be. Without this pattern, I am free to create new experiences out of the energy of love, rather than constantly creating out of the energy of grief, fear, famine, and vulnerability. Without this pattern, I am free to create a new relationship with food and drink out of the love that I am, rather than out of grief, fear, famine, and vulnerability I have operated from in the past. Without this pattern, I am free to create a new relationship with food and drink out of the love that I am and the compassion I have for me, rather than a dependency for healing of a false separation. Without this pattern, I am free to create a new relationship with food and drink out of the energy of love, rather than dependency. I don't have a problem with food and drink. I have a problem with old memories and the illusion of separateness from love. I pray over these memories and this illusion. I love you, God. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And thank you. Awesome. If you are struggling with overeating, do emotional polarity technique with a compassionate EPT practitioner who can help you overcome this. For some people, it only takes one session. For others, it takes more. Don't give up. EPT is an innovative, holistic, emotional therapy that can change your relationship with food for good. And that change itself may be exactly what you need to expand your life in ways you never imagined possible before now. This is not where you thought you were going. It's so much better. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and go get your free EPT training at eptworks.com. I'm Dr. Annette Cargioli, the Forgiveness Doctor. Until next time, listen, love, give. EPT works.